Good morning and thank you for joining us on Africa This Morning. It is the 6th of March 2014. My name is Beryl Ooro. Let's start the bulletin with a look at the top stories.
PSV strike in Nairobi. Citizens walk miles as public transport is paralyzed as matatu operators protest hike in parking fees. Ukraine-Russia standoff. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hold crucial talks to ease tensions over the Ukraine crisis.
Thousands take to the streets.
South Sudan refugee situation. Civil war in South Sudan has left people fleeing across the border into Darfur. Egypt elections. Egyptian Armed Forces Chief Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi sends clear signal that he will run for president on Tuesday.
Commuters in Kenya's capital, Nairobi, were stranded for hours yesterday morning after public service vehicle operators blocked roads to protest over increased parking fees. Some rowdy touts attacked and robbed private cars on Jogoo Road as the crisis intensified, prompting riot police to disperse them.
Commuters were forced to walk to work or seek alternative means of transport as operators stopped traffic on main streets in and around Nairobi to protest the hike of parking fee by the county government. Matatus found operating were attacked and passengers robbed. Taxi drivers and border operators who took advantage of the situation to ferry passengers were not spared either. Some were forced to flee from irate youth. The striking matatu operators then marched to City Hall to seek avenue with Nairobi Governor Evans Kidero, who urged them to return to work. To ensure sanity was restored in the city, Inspector General of Police David Kimayo ordered police to tow all vehicles blocking the roads. He ordered the number plates of taxis and matatus causing obstruction to be removed.
In the wake of the release of the KCSE results, education experts have strongly put forward the need for the government to review the method used to release the results. Sarah Ruto, the regional manager of Uwezo East Africa, says the flamboyance witnessed during the period is unnecessary as it fuels unfair competition. She also proposed a change in the approach of the current education system.
A number of students who sat last year's Kenya Certificate of Secondary Examinations did not qualify to study for any professional course. Though they have an option of pursuing vocational training, those students are victims of an education system that expert Sarah Ruto says can only benefit those who are academically bright.
I think we really need a sober look to admit that the system of education we have, which has not changed much in the 50 years of independence we have, is one that benefits the select few, the few who are good in academics.
In an interview with Ebru Africa This Morning, Ruto expressed concern that some students graduating from secondary schools are ill-educated due to failure of quality assurance systems in our schools. She says despite having a good number of students attaining the pass mark, 3 out of 10 children do not meet their curriculum requirement.
Our results have shown consistently for the last 4 years that only 3 out of 10 children who are in grade 3 have the skills they require at grade 2 level. And if that is to be used as a glimpse, then it shows you that we have very many children who go up the schooling ladder without meeting the curricular requirements.
Ruto also wants the government to review the method used to release national examination results.
I think we need to move away from that. The Minister of Education has no business making it such a political and very sensitive environment.
Diversifying the curriculum content and taking extracurriculum activities just as serious are some of the things that should be adopted.
Gunfire erupted inside the main army barracks in South Sudan's capital, where clashes last year sparked wider conflict. It started yesterday morning at the barracks situated in Juba near the university.
The gunfire started at the same barracks where fighting between army units sparked off fighting in Africa's newest nation, in which some 860,000 people have fled their homes. Witnesses say people in that area have started to flee to places of safety. The government is yet to comment, and it's not clear what the trouble is about, if it's related to the conflict that began in December last year or not. A ceasefire was agreed between the rebel and government forces towards the end of January this year. Both sides have thus far continued accusing each other of violating it. Talks between the two sides taking place in Ethiopia are currently suspended and are expected to resume on the 20th of March this year. Meanwhile, a report by Human Rights Watch says South Sudan's government troops and rebel forces have committed serious abuses that may amount to war crimes during fighting in the two oil-producing regions. The medical humanitarian organization Medicine Sans Frontiers reported scenes of horror in the regional capital Malakal. Thousands have been killed and more than 800,000 people fled their homes since fighting began in South Sudan 2 months ago, triggered by a power struggle between President Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, his former deputy whom he sacked in July.
About 900,000 South Sudanese are homeless since the war erupted in December. According to the United Nations Humanitarian Coordinator for South Sudan, Tony Lanza, about 195,000 of them have fled as refugees to Uganda, Ethiopia, and even Darfur.
The civil war in South Sudan has left people so hungry and desperate for relief that they are even fleeing across the border into Darfur, a long-troubled region of famine and suffering in neighboring Sudan. Sudan's western Darfur region has been gripped by violence since 2003, when rebels took up arms against the government. A total of 3.7 million South Sudanese are food insecure or unsure of where the next meal will come from, out of a population of about 11 million. According to the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, at least 20,000 people have entered into Kenya's Kakuma refugee camp in 2014 alone. A power struggle between the president and his deputy, whom he dismissed last July, triggered fighting that has killed thousands in the past few months. Despite a ceasefire on January the 23rd, the violence is worsening. The United Nations humanitarian appeal for South Sudan is more than $1 billion short of a target of $1.27 billion by June. A UN strategic response plan for Central African Republic has received only $112 million of $551 million needed this year.
If there was doubt about his interest in the top job, Egyptian Armed Forces Chief Field Marshal Abdel Fattah al-Sisi on Tuesday sent a clear message that he will run for the presidency, saying he cannot ignore the demands of the majority.
Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who ousted Egypt's first freely elected president Mohamed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood in July, said official procedures concerning his candidacy were expected in coming days. Sisi, widely expected to win the presidency of the Arab world's most populous country, was speaking at a graduation ceremony at the Cairo War College.
Recently, there has been much talk about the candidacy for the presidency, and people have just asked why the issue has not been addressed with simplicity. I just want to say something. Anyone who does not work in a public office is free to do as he pleases.
In his speech, Sisi said he hoped his remarks would be taken as a signal of his intentions.
I want to say that I speak like this as a sign so no one feels that there is too much talk and confusion amongst the people. I hope the sign has reached you all.
Most Egyptians regard him as a decisive figure who can end the political turmoil that has gripped Egypt since a popular uprising backed by the military-toppled autocratic President Hosni Mubarak in 2011. Aside from an ailing economy which grew by only 1% in the first quarter of this fiscal year, an energy crisis, industrial action and a tenacious Muslim Brotherhood, Sisi faces a fast-growing insurgency. Militants based in the Sinai Peninsula have stepped up attacks on policemen and soldiers since Morsi's fall, killing hundreds. Attacks have spread to other parts of Cairo, with attacks occurring almost daily.
The trial of Al Jazeera journalists accused of allegedly supporting the banned Muslim Brotherhood of ousted President Mohamed Morsi resumed yesterday in a case that has sparked a global outcry over muzzling of the press. The high-profile trial is seen as a test of what extent Egypt's military-installed authorities are prepared to allow freedom of the press to prevail, with activists expressing concern about a return to autocratic rule. The trial of Qatar-based Channel's journalist also comes against a backdrop of strained ties between Cairo and Doha, which backed Morsi deposed by the army in July. The journalists, including award-winning Australian reporter Peter Grest, are accused of supporting the Brotherhood and broadcasting false reports after police shut down Al Jazeera's Cairo offices in the aftermath of Morsi's overthrow. They all deny charges of supporting the banned Muslim Brotherhood. The trial is widely seen as a test of Egypt's army-backed government and its attitude to freedom of the press. The government and its supporters have accused international news networks of bias in their reporting of the ongoing political crisis. People in the cities around the world have been staging protests in support of the journalists since the trial opened last month. They're demanding the release of Grest, an Australian Al Jazeera English reporter, as well as Egyptian-Canadian Cairo bureau chief Mohamed Fahmy, Egyptian producer Baher Mohamed, and Egyptian Al Jazeera Arabic reporter Abdallah El-Shami. Oscar Pistorius' defense sought to prove that a married couple had heard screams on the night of River Steenkamp's death, and they colluded in their testimony, hoping to discredit key witnesses. Barrister Barry Rowe on Tuesday read details from a medical report indicating where exactly on the body Steenkamp was struck.
Certainly more composed in court than we've seen him before.
Blade runner Oscar Pistorius arrived at Pretoria High Court in South Africa on Tuesday for day 2 of his murder trial. The Paralympic sports star pleaded not guilty the day before to murdering his girlfriend Riva Steenkamp on Valentine's Day last year. Pistorius says he shot her in the bathroom of his home, thinking she was an intruder.
Spoken to people that came out in your evidence.
On Tuesday, the defense jumped into a fiery cross-examination. Lawyer Barry Rowe tried to take apart earlier prosecution testimony from Pistorius' neighbor Michelle Berger. She had said the day before she heard blood-curdling screams from a woman, followed by gunshots the night Steenkamp was killed.
You heard that out of a closed toilet in a house 177 meters away.
If Pistorius is convicted of intent to kill, he could receive a life sentence behind bars. His case has been compared to the high-profile murder trial of American football star and actor O.J. Simpson 2 decades ago.
Thousands of protesters flooded the streets of Venezuela's capital to decry worsening living conditions. This comes as the country commemorates the death of their former leader, Hugo Chavez, exactly a year ago. Flags, placards and chants are what characterized protests around the country's capital city, with thousands taking to the streets to mount pressure on the government. This expression of displeasure happened on the eve of Hugo Chavez's first death anniversary. The protests, led by students, are said to have started peacefully through middle-class neighborhoods, with the demonstrators dressed in white. Things, however, got ugly when the night fell as an estimate of 300 protesters threw rocks and firebombs at guard troops, who in turn responded with tear gas and water cannons. 3 people were detained and a photographer was beaten by protesters as a result. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro's government has been characterized by such protests since February 4th this year, leading to the death of at least 18 people and leaving 260 others injured. Some of the things they have against the government include rampant crime, soaring inflation, shortages and worsening living conditions have fueled anger with the government, particularly among the hard-hit middle class. Diplomatic efforts to ease tensions in Ukraine are gathering pace as 15 member states of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe agreed to send military observers to Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov were to meet in Paris as America pushes for direct talks between Kiev and Moscow.
Shame, Russia, shame! Shame, Russia!
Despite the sharp differences, both sides have hinted they would prefer to start dialogue. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov are expected to meet on the sidelines for a long-planned conference on Lebanon in Paris. The gathering is now being seen above all as a chance to test waters for dialogue about Ukraine. Moscow remains in de facto control of Ukraine's southern autonomous region. The tense standoff continued overnight in Crimea, but there were no reports of any violence. This as Ukrainian demonstrators gathered outside the Russian embassy in Canberra, Australia, to protest against any military action in the Ukraine by Russia. Holding placards and chanting anti-Russian slogans, about 50 people voiced their anger at Russian President Vladimir Putin.
The parliamentarians, as well as the Australian government, support Ukraine.
President Vladimir Putin delivered a robust defense on Russia's actions in Crimea, describing he would use force in Ukraine only as a last resort. Russian forces fired warning shots in a confrontation with Ukrainian servicemen at an airbase, and Russian naval ships were reported to have blockaded the strait separating Ukrainian Black Sea Peninsula from Russia. Washington and its Western allies have exerted pressure on Moscow to pull back its troops or face possible economic sanctions and diplomatic isolation.
India will start its national elections on April 7th, kicking off a month-long contest in the largest democracy in the world. Results are expected to be announced on May 16th after tallying.
The Election Commission announced the polls will be held in 9 phases until May the 12th. With 814 million people set to cast their vote, 100 million more than in the last election in 2009. A total of 930,000 polling stations will be set up, stretching from the remote Himalayas in the north to India's tropical southern strip. The voting was staggered over April and May to ensure voter safety in the country of 1.2 billion people. Ranked by a host of insurgencies from a separatist campaign in India's administered Kashmir in the north to a rebel Maoist movement in the east and central India. The Election Commission had taken into account weather conditions across the country, school holidays and harvest time for farmers when setting the dates. After 2 terms of coalition government led by leftist Congress Party and Bharatiya Janata Party, the BJP, under Modi is widely forecast to emerge as the bigger party in the next parliament.
At the Afghan-Pakistani border, one of the busiest border crossing points between the two Middle Eastern countries, Afghans dismiss militant threats and conspiracy theories about polio vaccination programs, while their children receive drops that could finally eradicate the crippling disease.
This is one of the busiest border crossing points between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and that's why it is also a key battleground in the fight against polio. Medical staff try to vaccinate as many children as they can under the age of 5. 2 drops of the vaccine, a mark on the finger, and they're on their way in less than a minute.
I know about polio. I know that the vaccine prevents paralysis in children. We have seen what health benefits it can bring to children on TV adverts.
Afghanistan and Pakistan are 2 of the 3 remaining countries in the world where the disease is still endemic. The number of cases is rising in Pakistan. The Taliban here are against immunization, saying it's a cover for U.S. spying. Vaccinators have been shot dead, bombed, and taken hostage. Polio awareness is generally higher in Afghanistan, but the porous border means tens of thousands cross daily between the countries, a challenge for healthcare workers.
Afghanistan and Pakistan are the same epidemiological bloc, and it's important that children on either side of the border are vaccinated to ensure absolute protection to other children in the respective countries.
Polio teams also go house to house and into camps to target moving populations such as the nomadic Kuchis, people displaced by the conflict, and migrant workers. Educating people about the disease and the vaccine to combat false rumors is key.
One boy said that when they drop the polio vaccine in the mouths of our sisters and brothers, they become naughty. I said, no, it's not like that.
Efforts to fight polio in Afghanistan are seeing success. The number of cases has dropped dramatically in the past 2 years, and vaccination programs are slowly expanding. But there's still a long way to go to reach the global goal of polio eradication by 2018.
And on that note, we come to the end of the Bulletin on Africa this morning. Join us shortly as we take a look at the leading stories on the social media platform in our segment on Trend.